Okay, welcome back, guys and girls. Here we go. This one is from the KZN paper 2, and it's question 2.3, which one of our learners has asked for. And it says, the graph below represents a population of baboons in a habitat. Okay, answer the questions that follow. Now, before we even do this, I'm going to take this down. I'm going to say it to you. You're only going to be able, or they're only going to give you 3 different types of graphs. Okay. First one, or growth graphs, actually only 2. So let's do, we've got what's called a J-shaped graph, okay, or geometric growth rate. Okay, so this is geometric growth rate, and just think J and J. So it's J-shaped geometric growth rate. And here we start off with just one little bacteria. And that one little bacteria becomes 2, becomes 4, becomes 8, becomes 16, becomes 32, and so it goes zhoosh. Okay, it's a J-shaped graph. And then they all die, hopefully. And this would be that they've run out of food. Okay, or they've poisoned their own environment, poisoned, polluted own environment. Okay, or you've taken an antibiotic. Okay, because it's bacteria. So you take an antibiotic, and what happens? You kill them all. Now, that's why we have to take an antibiotic for the 3 days or the 5 days or the 10 days of the course. And if it's for TB, we end up having to take the antibiotic for 6 months. But that's why you need to take your antibiotics to the end, not till you feel better, because if just one little bacteria survives, guess what? We get the same thing again. So for all of you people out there that had bronchitis 2 or 3 times straight after each other during winter, that's why. Your antibiotics, you either missed pills or you stopped taking the last one or whatever the case was, and this is what happens. But also, you sometimes get, you take your antibiotics, but you sometimes get 1 or 2 bacteria that are resistant to the antibiotic. So what do? Zhoops, up they go. That's why when your doctor prescribes the same antibiotic the second time in a space of 6 months, you say, no, I need a different antibiotic. I need one that's different or stronger. And that's where we're at. Okay, so this is the J-shaped or geometric growth graph. And then we get the S-shaped, okay, or logistic growth graph. And what we have here, okay, this is always number of organisms or estimated number of organisms, and this is over time. I didn't put that in over here, but this would be estimated number of organisms, and here's time. Okay, so what we've got is, again, we start off with 10 or 15 little organisms, and they acclimatize, and then they go up, and it does that. And there's your S shape. So your S-shaped or logistic growth graph, and this graph has 5 phases. Okay, whereas if you look at this graph, it's got 1 phase, which is slow geometric growth, and then all of a sudden it just huge increases in growth. All right, so let's look at our question. So those are the only 2 types, your J-shaped graph and your S-shaped graph. All right, your J-shaped geometric growth rate, bacteria, viruses, algae, any little tiny little organism that multiplies by mitosis. So if they multiply by mitosis, you've got 1 becomes 2, becomes 4, becomes 8, becomes 16, and you have that geometric growth rate. All right, and then your S-shaped graph. Now, graph below represents a population of baboons in a habitat. Answer the questions that follow. So we look at our baboons here, and there's your time in years and the number of organisms, the number of baboons. And we go from 0 all the way to about, now if that's 250, that will be about 225, then it's halfway. So we'll say that's about 210, 210, 212 over there, okay, across here. Now we'll see what this is here. This line always represents, and remember we have to first fill in everything that's on the graph. This is the carrying capacity. And what is carrying capacity? The carrying capacity is the number of organisms that can comfortably survive in a specific area. So if I have a farm and it's, I don't know, it's big enough to have 100 impala, and I then, those impala breed and I end up with 150, I now start running into problems. When those 150 impala now breed and I end up with 300 impala, I have a huge problem. All right, because I won't have enough food and shelter and water and space for those organisms. So we're then going to have intra-specific competition, and these organisms will start to die. And we don't want that. So carrying capacity is the number of organisms that an area can comfortably support. All right, now if we look at A and B and C and D, all right, now look at this population, it's going up and down. This means it is a relatively stable population. It's stable even though it's going up and down, but it's sort of going up and down around about the same average. Now this part here, this phase here is the lag phase. It is the phase where the organisms acclimatize. They come into this area, either they are brought into the area or organisms emigrate to the area and they are new to the area. And the males and the females mate, and the females now have the gestation period, and that is this lag phase. Lag phase is always acclimatizing. They're getting used to the area. And the females are gestating, they are pregnant. Okay, then we have this huge geometric growth phase. So this here is your growth phase. Okay, and the next phase here, this is the equilibrium phase. All right, and then D, well, here it starts to decline. So what's happening here is that your death rate is higher than your birth rate. Okay, so we'll have a population decrease phase here. So now that we understand what we're looking at, now we can say, now I mean I've taken longer to do it, but in an exam you get something like this, it'll take you 15 seconds to write all of this on. Now your brain knows, this is what we're going to be looking at. Okay, carrying capacity, it's about 110, 112, around about there. I mean 210, 212. We have our lag phase. They started off with, well, if that is 50 organisms, that would be 25, and they start here, so I'd say they started with approximately 20 organisms. Identify the phases labeled A and B, we've done that. Okay, name the E line in the baboon population. Well, the E line was the carrying capacity. Okay, so it's the number of organisms that that area can comfortably control and support, because otherwise they just die. At which part, which labeled part on the graph, is it more likely that mortality exceeded natality? Now remember, mortality is the death rate. We say that we are mortals, all right? And the fact that we are mortals means that we are born, we live, and we die. we are mortal. So mortality would be the death of that organism. And natality is the birth rate. Remember, and this is easy to remember, is that girls, women, go to antenatal classes before they have their babies. Okay, so natal means is before birth. So natality, birth rate. And then, so we've got to look here at which part of the graph is more likely that the death rate is higher. Exceeds means it is higher than the birth rate. So where is the death rate higher than the birth rate? It was at D. And then natality equals mortality. So your birth rate is equal to your death rate. Now, birth rate would be equal to the death rate where? If we look here, it was at A. Why? Because no organisms had been born and none died. So it's definitely A. But let's see if there's anywhere else. Where did your birth rate equal your death rate? Also at C. So it's A and C. And I don't think the examiners picked up on the fact that here, if you look at the graph, during A, there is no increase. There is no birth rate, there is no death rate. The females are pregnant. They're waiting to give birth. All right, so the answer here was A or C, and they would have had to accept both. Give one reason why there is a rapid growth rate at B. Now, why would there be a rapid growth rate here? Because during this phase, during A, you had acclimatization, matization, and gestation. Okay, in other words, the females were pregnant and they were acclimatizing. They're making their nests, they're doing whatever, depending on what animal we're looking at. Okay, and then, and B, then at, it's not a point. At B, there is a general birth process. So all these females that were pregnant here, now let's say we started off with 20 organisms, 20 baboons, and 10 were male and 10 were female. All right? So we now go from 10 females that are pregnant and they have their babies. So you go from a population of 20 to a population of 30, if not 40. All right, so, or 35, let's say, because some of them will have twins. So you go from a population of 20 to 35. And then you go from, then those babies mate and everything, and everybody sort of does their thing. And the next thing, you've got those, let's say that if there were 10 females here, and of the 15 new babies, let's take an average of 8 are female. You're looking at 18 females that are now ready to give birth, and so on and so on. So that is what happens here. So there's gestation, and then at B, there is a general birth process, which is followed by mating and birth. Okay, so what have we got here? We've got a higher natality than mortality rate. And that is what causes that incredible growth rate. Now name one factor other than food that might cause the population size to decrease. Now if you look at this here, what's going to cause this population to decrease other than food? Well, other than food, what causes a population to decrease? It's going to be emigration. Okay. Other than food, we've got predation. Food, shelter, water, space. I think those are the two biggies, is emigration or predation. You've also got disease, because the more organisms you have that are living near each other, if one gets sick, that disease spreads very quickly. Think about when you have flu and you go home. It's what we call a density-dependent factor. And let me just see if there are any more questions there. No, there aren't. But let me just go through this, because it's something learners battle with. You have density-dependent and density-independent factors. And the best way to think of these factors is, if it is density dependent, it means it depends on the number of organisms that you have. So if I have one organism versus 10, is there going to be an impact? Is there going to be a difference? And you'll say, okay, if I have one person to feed or I have 10 people to feed, it's going to be, food is definitely a problem. I can't feed 10 people the same food that I would have made for one person. So food and water always go together. Shelter, if I need a room for one person, that's easy. I can even fit 2 people into that room. And if the room is big enough, I could maybe fit 3 or 4 people into that room. But oh my gosh, I can't fit 10 people into one little room. So therefore, shelter, space, is going to be density dependent. Also disease. And disease is an easy one. Think about your home. Let's say you've got 2 or 3 brothers and sisters, and you've got your mom and your dad. And one of you gets flu. You pick it up at school, in class, and you go home. Within a week, everyone in the house has flu, has had flu, or is going to get flu. But you all end up being infected. Now, if you lived in a flat all on your own in Cape Town, and your family lived in Johannesburg, and your mom got flu, would it affect you? No, it wouldn't affect you at all. All right, so disease. So food, water, shelter, space, disease. But also, so those are your density-dependent parameters. And then our last one is predation. Now, one can argue that a lion will hunt its prey, and a cheetah will do the same, and a leopard will do the same, and a cat, your own cat, domestic cat that you have at home. If there is a mouse, the cat will chase the mouse and hunt it. And if there is a bird in the garden, the cat will definitely go and try and catch the bird. That is instinct, and you're never going to change that. But if there are 100 mice, your cat's going to have a field day. He's going to be able to catch a mouse easily. But if there's only one mouse, just think of Tom and Jerry, it's very hard to catch that one mouse. So the more there are, the easier it is for the predator. So predation increases when the prey is more. So it's a density dependent factor. It depends on the number of organisms. Will it make a difference if they're 10, 1, or if there's 10? And that's all you have to ask yourself in the exam. If we look at, let's do another color. I'm getting quite tired of this, of the green. But if we look at density independent factor, it means that the numbers of organisms do not matter. Okay, it doesn't matter. If there's one organism, if there's 10, if there's 1,000,000 trillion organisms, it does not matter. Then it is a density independent factor. So what would that be? It would be your natural disasters. So think about an earthquake. An earthquake is not going to say, you know what, just think of all the people here in San Francisco. So you know what, this year, come on, Earth, we're not going to have a big rumble and open up our crust and mess up a whole bunch of people's lives. It doesn't. A hurricane doesn't first sit with all the other hurricanes and say, hey, Katrina, you know, you were very cruel. Maybe we are going to take a different route so we don't hurt as many islands and destroy as many buildings and as many people's lives. Same with cyclones. Cyclones, earthquakes, hurricanes, river floods, droughts. Those things happen. It doesn't matter whether there's one organism or 50,000 organisms. If that river is flooding, it runs straight. And it doesn't matter what it destroys in its path, it's going to do it anyway. So it is independent of the factors completely. It doesn't matter how many organisms there are. So your natural disasters, and you can name any one of those natural disasters: hurricane, earthquake, cyclones, floods, droughts, they're going to happen anyway. All right, so there you go. And that's that. I think we're going to go to the studio for an ad break, and I'm going to have a sip of water because this throat is getting dry. So you do the same, and I'll see you in a minute.